Well, hey, everybody. My name is Dave, and just like all of you, I am trying to stay sane in the midst of COVID-19. All right. Thankfully, I do not have young kids running around the house like some of you do. And I don't even know how you're doing it, but I'm glad it's you and not me. That being said, you can imagine some of the rhythms of my life have been turned upside down. Typically, when I give a talk, I've got a team of 10 people who are speaking into it. And hey, we got this suggestion and this suggestion. But our team of 10 people is kind of scattered into in their different houses and different environments. And so they're kind of watching online. But I've got one guy in front of me who's like 6.5 feet away. That's what we're doing right now. There's no audience that I normally, would normally speak to. But here's the crazy thing. This team of 10 people, it is amazing how bold people get when they're not in the room with me. Hey, Dave needs to change his shirt. So I was wearing a dark shirt. Now I'm in a light shirt. Dave needs to change the picture behind him because it was giving a glare. I'm sorry, it was giving a glare to somebody. And then someone else was like, Dave needs to do that. And it's like, okay, I'm glad that they could be so bold without me. I can't wait till we're in a room together. And I can't wait till we're all in a room in our different locations at our different campuses together, because this is a challenge, right? And I'm grateful that you have joined us today, whether you are watching from your living room or your kitchen or your dining room. Some of you maybe are driving in a car, hanging out with us. And I know some of you, you're in your bedroom about, you go, wow, wow, right? Hey, whatever you want to do and however you want to join us, I am grateful. And I know for some of you, this is actually a big challenge to join virtually. This is not what you're used to. It doesn't feel connected, even though, we're doing this, trying to get everybody on the same page, watching at the same time. And I just want to say thank you for inconveniencing yourself and your willingness to do this. We're going to get past this. I promise you. And then I just want to also say thank you to those of you who over the last couple of weeks, as crazy as our economy has gotten, you've stayed faithful in your generosity and in your giving. I know that some of you who typically give by checks or by cash, because you're old school that way, you actually went online and set up an account. And I just want to say thank you. All right. Today, what we're going to do is we are going to wrap up a series that we have now been in for several weeks called Prove It. And kind of the heart behind this series is that there are people who are constantly coming up with stories or claims or statistics and throwing them our way. And it's really hard to know what's true and what's not true. Right. In the late 1950s, the BBC's broadcasting network aired a 3-minute video segment in which they showed farmers harvesting spaghetti noodles from a grove of trees in Switzerland. Just a crazy story. And what they did is they removed the noodles from the branches and then they put them in these big baskets to dry out in the sun and to get prepared, for people to eat. And they show this segment, as you can imagine, the station is loaded up with different phone calls from people who are saying, hey, how in the world can I have a spaghetti tree? Where do you buy these things? And so they explain, well, what you need to do is you need to take dry spaghetti noodles and put them in marinara sauce. And over time, it'll eventually grow into a tree. Well, I don't know how people missed it, but the date this was aired was April 1st, 1957. Total April Fool's joke, but people bought it. And again, it reminds us, you can make any claim you want to. You can say anything you want. The big issue is, can you back it up? Right? Can you prove it? And there are 2 billion people right now on this planet who claim to follow Jesus. This is what the series is rooted in, right? This is the heart. Think about this. 25% of our world's population claims to follow Jesus. And the question is, how do we know that's true? Like, what's the proof that somebody really does follow Jesus? I can say anything I want, but what really is the proof? And I'm not asking that to make anybody insecure or to cause you to question your faith. I'm asking it because I think we all need clarity. And thankfully, Jesus, one day in talking to a group of his followers, makes it very clear. He says this, he says, your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. That's the proof. Not how long you pray, not how many Bible verses you memorized. Quite honestly, not even how well-behaved you are or how disciplined or how structured you are. The proof is how well you love people. That's it. Now, the Apostle Paul in the first century, he writes a letter to followers of Jesus, and he paints for us a picture of what love looks like. And over the last several weeks, we've been talking about that, right? He talks about how love is patient and love is kind and love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. And he talks about all these things that pretty much says love is for people. It's not against people. Love respects people. It treats people with honor. It treats people with dignity because everybody's been made in the image of God. And so he writes all of this stuff about love, paints this amazing picture for us. And then he writes this: love never gives up. It endures through every circumstance. Love never gives up. Now, this is a big deal. And in 2020, as we deal with the COVID-19 crisis and all the implications and the results and the consequences of that crisis, it's important for us to remember this, that love does not give up. Because I'm going to tell you something that I've just learned in life, something I've experienced in my own marriage, in my own parenting, and just something I personally have gone through. And that is this: you can have all the intentions of loving people. You can have the biggest heart for people. You can care so much about doing good in this world. But when you start feeling stressed out and overwhelmed and insecure, when you start feeling anxious about the future, it's very easy for our desire to be kind and generous and loving and respectful and honoring of people and for people. It's very easy for that feeling and that emotion to do those things and that decision and commitment to do those things to be overwhelmed and overpowered and overshadowed with fear and with impatience and with insensitivity and, quite honestly, things that we would just call callous behavior. And so if we're going to stay strong in this season, regardless of how long it lasts, if we're going to continue to be people who evidence to the world that we are followers of Jesus by the way we love people and respect people and are kind to people and are for people, then we need to make sure our emotions don't overpower or overshadow our ability to love others. And so what I want to do is I just want to give us kind of some guardrails today to help us do that. And my goal isn't to sugarcoat anybody's fear, right? It's not to minimize anybody's anxiety or sadness or what you're particularly going through in your life, in your particular situation. But what my goal today is to just give us a new focus and a new perspective on how to look at our fear and anxiety in the things that we're experiencing in our life. So let me give you 4 words that I want you to think about. And if you're in a place where you can write down these words, I encourage you to do them. The first word is this: common. What we're going through right now in our world is common. Now, COVID-19 is not common. Shutting down schools, closing restaurants and bars, that's not common. The stock market being so unpredictable, that's not common. People working from their homes, all over the place, that's not common. What is common is that as humans, we worry about the future. What is common is that as humans, we worry about our health. We worry about our financial stability. We worry about feeling secure. And so I think it's important for us in this season to remind ourselves, regardless of what our unique situation looks like, we need to continually remind ourselves that whatever it is, I am not alone. I am not alone. I am not alone. Over the past few years, my wife, Randy, and I, we've shared very openly about the agony we've gone through in watching our daughter, Alyssa, fight different battles in her life, battles of anxiety and depression. We've watched her on many occasions go through just this period where she felt very isolated and alone. And she would tell us, nobody can relate. Nobody understands what I'm going through. And after 4 years of this past week, my wife and I got to attend Alyssa's graduation. There were a handful of girls that graduated from the program she's in. And what's interesting is they started the graduation with a song by Lauren Daigle called You Say. And it was a song that Alyssa had actually picked out. She requested for it to be sung at the graduation. And if you've never heard it, here's how the song starts. I keep fighting voices in my mind that say I'm not enough. Every single lie that tells me I will never measure up. Am I more than just a sum of every high and every low? Remind me once again just who I am, because I need to know. And then the song transitions into these words of, here's how I feel, but here's what God feels about me. So Lauren writes, you say I am loved when I can't feel a thing. And you say I am strong when I think I am weak. And you say I am held when I am falling short. And then just over and over, you say this when I feel this about me. And I looked around the room as this song was being sung, and every girl, I mean, these young women packed into a room, raising their hands as just an act of worship, an act of surrender to God. And they're singing the song at the top of their voices. And I got very, very choked up, and I started wiping tears because it hit me. Every one of these girls over the last couple of years have gone through seasons where they felt isolated and they felt alone and they felt like nobody could understand what they're going through. But as they're in this room together, they realize, hey, there's a lot of us who went through this. We just didn't know that other people were experiencing what we were experiencing. And then at the end of the graduation, they had each of the girls graduating stand up for probably 3 or 4 minutes and share their story. To say, hey, here's where I was, and then here's the journey I've been on, and here's where I am today. And it was just very, very emotional. And even though the details of their stories were all different, there were some common themes. There were themes of insecurity, themes of I made some bad decisions and I suffered consequences from those decisions, themes of fear, themes of brokenness, themes of dysfunction. And once again, I just got very, very choked up because I'm hearing these girls and I'm thinking, every one of them kept thinking at certain seasons, I'm alone, nobody can understand. But as they shared these stories, they realized, hey, we've all been through this. We've all been on this journey. And there's power when you realize that what you're going through is more common than you thought. And you probably don't realize this, but when we read through the different manuscripts that make up our Bible, we encounter all sorts of individuals who felt alone, and they felt like what they were going through was super unique to them. And so early on in our Bible, we read about a couple, Abraham and Sarah, who navigated years and years of painful infertility. And then a little bit later, we read about a teenager named Joseph. He was rejected by people in his own family. At one point, he decides in the midst of severe temptation, like, I'm going to do the right thing. And even though he does the right thing, someone accuses him of doing the wrong thing, and so he has to deal with the consequences of false accusation. Then a little bit later, we read about a woman named Naomi. We read about Naomi's family. They're refugees in a time of famine where their homeland is going through intense famine. And so here they are as refugees, and they're just trying to stay healthy and make it. Well, eventually the famine ends. They go back to their hometown, and Naomi's depleted. Naomi feels like she has nothing left to give. And then we read about a young man named David. And David is being chased and pursued by an insecure and evil-spirited king by the name of Saul. And so David, even though he's done really nothing wrong, he spends a season of his life hiding out in caves, just trying to stay alive. And just story after story of people that we read about in the Bible, like real individuals who we would think, man, they had things all together and everything went well for them. And the reality is, when we read their stories, we realize we are not alone in what we go through. We're not alone in our difficulty. We're not alone in our loneliness. We're not alone in our pain. And then we look at the life of Jesus, who obviously did nothing wrong. Every decision he made, we would say, well, that was the right decision. And yet in the final week of his life, he experiences intense betrayal and abandonment by someone in his inner circle, Judas. And so here's what I want you to know. We live in a broken world, and what we're going through, as painful as it is, and it's painful, as challenging as it is not as unusual as we tend to think it is while we're going through it. And so the challenge for us when we go through difficult times is to do the same thing that followers of Jesus have done all throughout history. And that's learn how to trust in God, learn how to hold on to our faith, and learn how to be faithful in following Jesus and honoring God by the decisions we make when the bottom feels like it's falling out. So the first word is common. The second word is manageable, right? The problems that we experience in this life, and I hate to even say this because it sounds insensitive, but they're rarely as big as our emotions make them out to be. And so just take COVID-19, right? It's a big deal. And I don't ever want to come across as minimizing it. But if you were just to think about other things that our world has gone through, the Spanish flu of 1918, right? 1/3 of the world's population was infected with the virus. Worldwide, there were more than or at least around 50 million people who died. It was a really, really big deal. Now, it doesn't minimize COVID-19, but it puts things into perspective. Or think of the Great Depression. The Great Depression lasted 10 years. In the first 5 years, the stock market went down around 90%. 1 out of 4 people were out of work. The average family income dropped by 40%. Now, that doesn't fix whatever you're going through in your marriage. It doesn't fix whatever you're going through with your sickness. It doesn't fix what you're going through in regards to having lost a job recently, but it does put things into perspective. And then, of course, we could talk about all the natural disasters we've seen over the years, the tsunamis, the hurricanes, the earthquakes, the fires, the floods, all of that stuff. And what I want us to think about is there is discomfort, and then there's discomfort. There's turmoil, and then there is turmoil. There is pain, and then there is a different level of pain. And so whatever we go through in life, I just want to challenge us. Let's just keep it in perspective. Otherwise, what happens is the stress and the uncertainty and the pressure of our day really does overpower our desire to show love to people because we're on edge. We start being unkind. We start being thoughtless in what we're doing. Instead of being open-handed, we're tight-fisted and we're just callous in our behavior. And we're just thinking about ourselves, which is very common when we're stressed out. And so I want you to remember this. What we go through in life is common and it's more manageable sometimes than we think it is. The third word I want to throw your way is the word temporary. Whatever you're going through in your marriage, whatever you're experiencing with your child, right, in your parenting challenges, what you go through in your career and in your finances, I'm just going to tell you, if you stick with it long enough, most of the time, it's going to pass. That's why the Spanish flu of 1918 isn't called the 100-year flu. That's why the Great Depression has a time period attached to it, right? It didn't last forever. There's not a natural disaster that our world's ever experienced that has gone on and on and on and never had an end. And so if you're impacted right now by the coronavirus, whether it's through employment or fear or in any other way, maybe your health, I'm just going to let you know this. This too shall pass. Now, I know your kids aren't going to want to hear this, but I'm telling you, there's going to be a day that our schools reopen. There's going to be a day that our restaurants and bars are welcoming people again. There's going to be a day where you're able to shake hands with people. Heck, I'm guessing when this is said and done, we're just going to go out and hug and kiss strangers because we're going to be so ready for it. But I'm telling you, there is going to be a day where this comes to an end. There's going to be a day when you can go to any store and toilet paper is going to be in stock, right? It's not going to be like somebody had Taco Bell the night before, which is how we're all reacting right now. It's just challenges come and challenges go. Most of you remember the collapse of the housing market in 2008. I mean, that was just, 12 years ago. Now, notice we don't call it the challenge of the housing market in 2008, which is what it should have been called. It was the collapse. I mean, everything was over. I actually sold a house in 2008, and believe me, I lost a whole lot of money. Most of my life savings I lost in that sale. And for those of you who you tried to sell a house, you know, I mean, it was just month after month, you're lowering the price, and it could be 18 months before you had a bite. Well, if you've lived in Southeast Wisconsin over the last couple of years, you could put a house on the market and 18 minutes later, you could have had a bite. I mean, heck, it wasn't uncommon to have 2 or 3 bids or offers, full price offers on a house in the same day. And maybe that feels a little exaggerated to you, but here's what I want you to hear. Whatever we go through in this life eventually passes. And it gives us hope if we can just hold on to it. And the fourth thing I want you to think about, the fourth word I want you to focus in on is the word productive. There is always good that comes from bad situations. That's why right now in living rooms and in basements and in bedrooms all across the country, there are entrepreneurs who are thinking, how can I make money? How can good come out of this? If you've ever heard Dave Ramsey's story, he's the financial expert. He's got a whole lot of people that he's helped get out of debt and come into freedom. Dave Ramsey filed for bankruptcy in 1988. It devastated him. And he talks about how in that season, he was so devastated. He said, I don't ever want to go through this again. And so he decided to study financial principles. And out of those principles, he was able to birth his business. And he wrote a book and helping people find financial freedom. And so I just want you to know, whatever you go through in life, whether it's related to COVID-19 or not, good can come out of it. In fact, right now, there are people who are saying, hey, my family's becoming closer. We're spending more time together. There's people saying, man, I'm finally getting rest. I'm focusing on my health. I can't tell you how many people say I'm working out. Like I'm literally caring about my health in this season more than ever. Now, I hate you, right? I don't understand how people could take this crisis and say, I'm going to work out and I'm going to get on treadmill. Good for you. But all of us should be able to find good that comes out of this. And whatever you're dealing with, I know it doesn't feel common and it doesn't feel manageable and it doesn't feel temporary or productive in any way. But I'm telling you, good can come out of this. Now, for those of you who, you look at your situation and it's bigger than COVID-19, it's a terminal illness. Or maybe for you, you're about to retire, but now you're saying, man, I have to put this off for a while. Or you're in the service and restaurant industry, but it's not a big chain restaurant. It's a private restaurant. You don't even know that you're going to be able to reopen. Or you're in a bad marriage and you can't see past today. Or you've got a child who's gone down a wayward path. I want to tell you, even in your situation, there's hope. Right? In fact, I want you to listen to the words of the Apostle Paul that were written to followers of Jesus living in Corinth. If you're not familiar with Corinth, it's located in southern Greece. Paul spent about 18 months of his life there building a faith community. And then Paul goes to Ephesus. He goes to modern day Turkey and he spends about 3 years there. And it's not an easy situation. There's a lot of animosity towards Paul and his team of friends. There's a lot of intense situations he's faced with. In fact, in a second book he writes to followers of Jesus in Corinth, he talks about this. Here's what he writes. He says, we were crushed and overwhelmed beyond our ability to endure, and we thought we would never live through it. Paul says we were overwhelmed. It felt too much for us. Like we felt like we were going to collapse under the weight. And then he writes this, but as a result, we stopped relying on ourselves and learned to rely on God who raises the dead. He said, we just got to a point. There was so much conflict. There was so much crisis. There was so much pressure that we just finally said, we've got to find a way to shift our hope and from our abilities and how we can fix things right now and the connections we have and how we're going to make it through. And we just got to say, God, we realize you at some level are ultimately in control. And so we're going to do our best to do what we're able to do, but ultimately what we're able to do is limited. And so we place our hope in you and in you alone. And Paul writes a little bit later as he's focusing on how he shifted his hope to God. He writes this, he says, for our present troubles are small and won't last very long. Now, another translation says our present troubles, they're light and they're momentary. Like this isn't going to go on forever. And then he says, yet they produce for us a glory that vastly outweighs them and will last forever. If you were just to summarize what Paul writes here, our problems are common, they're manageable, they're temporary, and they can be productive. But even when it doesn't feel like that, even when it gets to the point where it's just like, I don't know in this life that I'm ever going to feel like things were fixed, right? I want to remind you, our ultimate hope isn't getting all of our vacation time back. And it's not in like our retirement account returning to where it once was. It's not in having picture perfect health. Our ultimate hope is that someday on the other side of this life, we will all be gathered together in a setting worshiping God, and we won't be 6 feet away from one another, and there won't be, all these rules set up in place and structure. We will be in unison worshiping God in a place where there is no more tears. There are no more tears. There's no more death. There's no more sorrow. There's no more sickness. There's no more broken marriages. There's no more dysfunctional family. It's over. It's over. And so as Paul thinks about this, he says, listen, what we go through, it's light, it's momentary. In the very next verse, he writes this. So we don't look at the troubles we can see now. Rather, we fix our gaze on things that cannot be seen. For the things we see now will soon be gone, but the things we cannot see will last forever. My question to you is, are you focusing on the things that can be seen or the things that are unseen? Because where we place our focus will determine how much we're truly able to love people in this season. Because I'm going to say it again, we can have all the desires and all the great intentions of I'm going to love and I'm going to be kind and I'm going to be respectful and I'm going to be for someone, not against them, and I'm going to be generous. But the more fear that piles up, the more anxiety, the more uncertainty, the more craziness, the more life feels out of control, the easier it will be to start lashing out at people. The easier it'll be to be unkind to our wife or to our kids. The easier it'll be for us to hold tightly to things rather than be generous. And so if you want to focus on the reality that what we go through is common, it's manageable, it's temporary, and it can be productive, let me give you 2 ways to focus your life. Number 1 is just make it a habit to express gratitude in this season. Now, maybe you already do this, but if you don't, I encourage you, at least in this season, keep a gratitude journal. There's a whole lot of things that are going wrong we could focus in on, but focus in on what's going right. This is why the Apostle Paul writes a letter to followers of Jesus in Thessalonica, and he writes this: be thankful in all circumstances. Like, just be thankful, whatever you're going through. When your marriage is good, be thankful. And when your marriage isn't so good, find things to be thankful for. When your kids listen to everything you say and they're, thank you, Mom, you're so good to me. Oh, I love your wisdom. Be thankful. And when they reject your wisdom, find something to be grateful for with your kids, right? And we can apply that to any area of life. Express gratitude. And then number 2, find one person or one family in this season to show love to in a practical way. Words of encouragement, cards, financial gifts. If you just know, hey, someone's going through a difficult time, find a person or a family to reach out to. It was Tuesday, on the very week that Jesus would be arrested and crucified, and he's teaching at the temple. And while he's teaching, there's a religious leader who interrupts him and says, Jesus, I'm just overwhelmed. We've got 600 some laws. We've got 600 some rules that we're supposed to follow. What's the top priority? Like, what do you think's most important? And Jesus doesn't even miss a beat. He says, well, I'll tell you what it is. Love God and love people. Love God and love people. He says, love God with all your heart, with your soul, with your mind, and with your strength. And then he says, and then love people as you love yourself. And this is huge, because he says, it's easy to put your hands up to God and say, you're faithful and you're good and you're going to take care of me and you protect me. He says, but take those same arms stretched out toward God and reach them around other people, but not while COVID-19 is happening. We don't want to do it now, right? But serve people and care for people and be generous to people. There's a documentary that's called Muscle Shoals. It's about a guy named Rick Hall who founded a music studio in this small town called Muscle Shoals. It's an Alabama town of about 13,000 people. And it's a town filled with lots of racial hostility. It's a town filled with poverty. But what Rick Hall does is he creates this studio in this small town. And out of this studio has come some of the most influential music we've ever heard in the last 50 years. I mean, Rolling Stones have recorded there. Willie Nelson has recorded there, right? Aretha Franklin, Rod Stewart, Percy Sledge, Donny Osmond. I could go on and on and on. Most people have never heard of the town Muscle Shoals. They haven't heard of the studio Muscle Shoals. But what they have heard is the music that's come out of it. And my guess is that your act of kindness, your act of respect, your act of being for someone, not against them, most people aren't going to be aware of what you do for people. Not everything is shared on social media or on the nightly news. But I'm telling you, it's going to have repercussions, and your impact is going to be seen by how you treat people. Maya Angelou has said this. I'm sure you've heard it before. I've learned that people will forget what you said and people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And so my hope and my prayer is in this season, those of us who are part of Great Lakes Church, and even those of you who aren't, and you're just kind of checking in and watching online, that we would be people who constantly show love and make sure people feel respected and valued and known and cared about, and they know that we are with them. Let me pray for you. Our Heavenly Father, I pray that as stress piles up, as anxiety pressures up, as insecurity kind of piles up, that it would not overwhelm us to the point that our ability to show love is impacted. But Heavenly Father, that as we remember the things we go through in this life, they're common, they're manageable, they're temporary, and that they can actually even be productive. I pray as we remember that we would be fueled in our love for people. Help us to stay focused. Help us to stay grateful, and help us to identify that one person or one family that we can focus in on with encouragement in this season. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, thanks for joining us today. I hope you continue to do a great job at staying busy and occupied and having fun with your family and your friends, even if it has to be via the internet. Guys, have a great day.